In this tutorial I'm going to show you how to make these beautiful thistles. Perfect for St Andrew's Day, but also something you could wear all year round. The colours on these are absolutely gorgeous. They would look lovely with a little brooch attachment on them to wear on your coat or in your buttonhole. Uses some very basic stitches. We have UK terms for double crochet, slip stitch and picot stitch. So really lovely, nice easy pattern for beginners to do if you're wanting to start attempting to make amigurumi. This would be a really good place to start. Hello, my name's Karen Stangram and welcome to Conquer Crochet, the channel for tips, tricks and techniques for conquering your crochet. Everything I talk about in today's video will be linked in the descriptions below. And if you're new here, please consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell so you don't miss a single stitch. So if you're keen to get going with this video, give me a thumbs up and let's do this. So for this tutorial then I'm going to be using 100% cotton. This is Patterns 100% cotton in a double knit. I have a green and a lilac and a darker purple. You don't need to have the darker purple or two colours of purple, but I quite like the way you get a more sort of natural looking colour when you have the two different purples in there. But the choice is yours. As long as you have at least one of the purples, then this will look lovely. I'm also going to be using a 3mm crochet hook. I have scissors to cut off my ends, my yarn needle for sewing in my ends, I have a stitch marker, and unusually I have a hair comb. So let's get on with the tutorial. So we're going to start off with the green, making the seed pod. Next we make the seeds and then we work on the stem last of all. So we're going to start off with our green. You can use any colour green that you like, but I find this sort of greying green is quite a nice green to use. So we're going to start off by making a magic ring. I'll put a link in the descriptions below for a video I have on making the magic ring if you want to have a little bit more of a closer look on how this actually works. So I make my magic ring and I chain one. I'm now going to do 8 double crochets into the ring. That's double crochet in UK terminology. In US terminology that would be single crochet. So I'm going to go through the ring, pull up my yarn, yarn over and pull through the 2 on my loop. That's 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8. I'm going to pull on the tail of the ring just to close that up, and you don't need to pull it too tightly because we will need to use this center ring for securing our seeds later in the pattern. So don't worry about pulling it too tightly. And we're then going to join in a slip stitch with a slip stitch to the first stitch. So we did 8, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we're going to join into there. And we're going to go in with a slip stitch as we go through both parts of that stitch. Yarn over, pull through, then pull through the one on your hook. And that's round 1 complete. So for round 2 we're going to chain 1 and we're going to work 2 double crochets in the next stitch. That's 1, 2 and 1 double crochet in the next stitch. So that's the first of our repeat pattern. We're going to repeat that 4 times. So that's 1, 2 double crochets in the next stitch, 1 in the next. That's 2 double crochets in the next stitch, 1 double crochet in the next. That's the third repeat. 2 double crochets in the next stitch, 1, 2 and 1 double crochet in the last stitch. Now this next part here is where we did our chain 1 for the next round. So we need to be joining to the top of this stitch, and you can always check that by counting round. So we had 8 in the first round, but we've added an extra 4, so we should have 12 stitches in this round. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So we're going into the top here, not into that stitch there, because that was the one that gave us the height for the new round. And we're going in there with a slip stitch, so insert yarn over, pull through, and pull the yarn through the one on your hook. So that's round 2 complete. Round 3, very similar, chain 1, and we're going to do 2 double crochets in the next stitch, 1 and 2, 1 double crochet in the next, and that's the repeat pattern again, but we're going to do it 6 times this time. So that's once, 1, 2, and then 1, that's twice, 1, 2 in the same stitch, and 1 in the next, that's 3, 1, 2, 1 in the next, that's 4, 1, 2, 1 in the next, that's 5, 1, 2, and 1 in the next, 6. Remember, that's our turning chain, so we're going to join into the first double crochet that we made. So I'm going to insert, and we're joining with a slip stitch again, and pull through the one on your hook. So that's round 3. Round 4, 5 and 6, we're just going to be working double crochets, and we're going to be working in a spiral this time. So we've started off with the increases in our circle, but now we're moving more into an amigurumi style, so we're going to work in spirals, and this is where your stitch marker will come in. So we're going to start in the next stitch. So we've been in this one, we're going to do our first double crochet in the next stitch without chaining 1, and that's where we're going to put our stitch marker to remind us. So I'm going to insert my stitch marker through that stitch I've just made, so I know that's stitch number 1, and then we're going to work all the way around our circle with double crochets in each stitch. And try to make your stitches as tight as you can, because we don't want to see too many gaps. It just makes the work look a little bit neater. You find most amigurumi the stitches are quite tight, usually because we don't want to see the stuffing through them. And if you find your stitches aren't quite tight enough, you could go down a hook size. So I'm using a 3 at the moment. You could go down to a 2.5, 2.5. All depends on the yarn you're using as well. If you're using a acrylic yarn or a wool yarn, then you might find that the fluffiness sort of covers up any gaps, but when you're working with cotton, everything is exposed. And I do prefer using cotton for doing sort of amigurumi things. I just find it's much neater and it doesn't have that fuzziness about it. Okay, so that is round 4. We've worked all our way around. I'm going to take the stitch marker out, and I'm going to do my first stitch of round 5, which again is a double crochet. Insert my stitch mark into that stitch, and just you can count the stitches and not have the stitch marker, but I just find having the stitch marker means I don't have to think too much. Okay, so we're going to continue round 5 and round 6 in exactly the same way. So we're just working around 1 double crochet in each stitch. When we get to the end here, we take the stitch marker out, do our first stitch for round 6 and put the stitch marker in that first stitch. So pause the video now whilst you complete rounds 5 and 6. So that's round 6 complete. I'm going to take my stitch marker out. So for round 7 we're going to do a decrease, and we're going to start off by double crocheting 2 together, then we do 1 double crochet in the next stitch. Now ordinarily when you're doing this you would go through both parts of the stitch, but when you're doing it with amigurumi, to get less of a bulk inside, you just go through the front loop of the stitch, yarn over, pull through, then go through the front loop of the second stitch, yarn over, pull through, and then yarn over, pull through all 3 loops. You get a much less bulky appearance to your work. So that's 1, and I'm just going to put my stitch marker back in there to remind me, because I haven't chained 1, so I don't have the height to remind me where it is. We'll be repeating this pattern 6 times. So we're doing double crochet 2 together, 1 double crochet, double crochet 2 together, using those front loops only, and 1 double crochet in the next stitch. So let me just show you that a little bit closer. So you're going through that front loop there, 1, yarn over, pull through the next front loop. My camera's gone there, hang on. Next front loop, yarn over, pull through. So you should have 3 loops on your hook. You yarn over and you pull through all 3, and then we double crochet into the next stitch. Double crochet 2 together, front loops only, 1 double crochet in the next stitch, double crochet 2 together, 1 and 2, double crochet in the next stitch, and then the last one, double crochet 2 together, and 1 double crochet in the last stitch. So that's round 7. Rounds 8 and 9 we're going to be double crocheting 1 in each stitch, as we did for round 4 to 6. So I'm going to do a double crochet in that first one, put my stitch marker back in, and then I'm going to work 1 double crochet in each of those stitches all the way around. Now I sometimes find it easier, rather than keeping it ball shaped, I find it easier to sort of flatten the work as I'm going around, and you can always reshape it afterwards. So we're going around, this is round 8, so we're doing 1 double crochet in each, flatten it out on the next bit, 1 double crochet in each all the way round row 8, and then row 9 is going to be exactly the same, and again we're working in a spiral, so we're not going to chain 1 after this round. We won't be slip stitching to join, we're just going to continue going. So that's round 8, take out my stitch marker, starting stitch of round 9, put the stitch marker back in. So pause the video now whilst you work round your double crochet stitches for row 9, and I'll join you at the end. So I come to the end of row 9, so I can remove my stitch marker. And for row 10 we're going to be working some picot stitches. And before I do that, I'm going to get rid of this tail because it keeps getting in the way. So I'm just going to tuck that inside the seed pod that we've made. One all the way to the bottom. There we go. So for the first stitch in round 10, we're going to slip stitch into the next stitch. So we insert, pull the yarn through, pull through the one on our hook. We're then going to chain 2. And we're going to slip stitch into that first stitch that we chained, and there's our picot. We're going to slip stitch into the next stitch, We're then going to chain 2, 1, 2, and we're going to slip stitch into the first stitch that we made. Slip stitch into the next stitch. Oops, needed a double then. There we go, slip stitch, chain 2, 1, 2, slip stitch into that second chain from the hook, or the first one that we made, and slip stitch into the next stitch. Chain 2, 1, 2, slip stitch into the second one from the hook, and slip stitch in the next stitch. Again, I'm going to sort of flatten my work out because I've done that side. Chain 2, slip stitch into that second chain from the hook, and slip stitch into the next stitch. Chain 2, 1, 2, slip stitch into the second chain from the hook, and slip stitch into the next stitch. Chain 2, 1, 2, slip stitch into the second chain from the hook, and slip stitch into the next stitch. Just my work round, flatten it out. Just a few more to go on this round, so chain 2, slip stitch into the next stitch, slip stitch into the second chain from the hook, slip stitch into the next stitch. Chain 2, slip stitch in the second one from the hook, and slip stitch into the next stitch. Chain 2, slip stitch in the second one from the hook, and slip stitch in the next stitch. Chain 2, slip stitch in the second one from the hook, and slip stitch into the next stitch. So this was our starting slip stitch here. So we're going to chain 2, slip stitch into the second chain from the hook, slip stitch into the next stitch, and we're going to fasten off there. So I'm going to yarn over and pull through. Don't need to leave a long tail because we're just going to be weaving it in. Cut off our ends and pull the yarn through. So to get rid of this tail, then you might want to turn your work inside out slightly, and we're just going to weave that tail away into these stitches here. I wouldn't worry about doing the power of 3 by taking it back and forth for this, because it's inside the pod that's not going to be seen, and it's not, unless you're going to be using this as a toy, which you probably wouldn't be. So there you go, that is the seed pod made. So we can just pop that to one side and we can move on to the seeds. So to make the seed part, we're going to need our purples, and we need to be filling this gap here with our purple seeds. So what we need to do is to start off by getting some of our purple yarn, and you might want to do 2 together, you might want to do one of each colour, you might want to do just a couple of the dark, it's entirely up to you. I think I did a few dark ones here just to give it a different sort of variation in colour, but for this one I'm going to do lots of darker ones. So I've got 3 fingers, and I'm going to secure with my thumb on my ring finger just to start off. So I've got the 2 bits of thread, and just leave a little gap between your pointing finger and your middle finger, just so that you can actually slide it off. If you do it too tightly, you're not going to be able to get your fingers out and it will hurt. So we're going to go round, wrapping around our fingers. And this will depend on the yarn you're using, how many times you wrap around. But just have a think, it's this thickness and this thickness that's going to go into this gap. So I'm just going to do a few more wraparounds. And then I'm going to cut off my yarn. I'm just going to slide my pointing finger out just so I've got a little bit more space. I'm going to take my green yarn and I'm going to pull it through the loop at the bottom, and I'm just going to tie that off there. I can take my fingers out now, and I'm just going to do a few more knots just so that's nice and secure. If you wanted to, you could do this with wire, but I like to do everything with crochet as much as I can with the yarn. Okay, and I'm going to leave a little bit of a tail because we're going to need that in a second. So I'm going to take my yarn needle, I'm going to thread it through, and I'm going to thread through this little tail as well. And going through the middle of the pod, I'm going to insert my needle so that it comes out through the bottom, through that magic ring at the bottom. I'm just going to pull that through. I've got both parts of that yarn there. Put it right down into the pod. I'm just going to take the long yarn, not the short yarn, and move it into a stitch and pull it through, and now I can tie these into a knot and they should stay fairly secure. We can then weave these ends through and cut them off, and they're hidden inside our little pod there. So that's our seeds attached. So then, taking our scissors again, we're just going to cut the tops of those loops to separate the seeds through, and they should all be nice and secure at the bottom now. Make sure you've done a couple of knots. And just move them around a bit so you can see where the loops are. Have I got all of the loops? Yes, I'm happy with that. So I'm going to straighten those out. I might give them a quick trim. So depending on the length that you want your seeds to be. So you don't want them too long because they'll be out of proportion with the seed pod. Okay, let's just move all those bits to the side, and this is the fun bit. This is where we're going to take our comb, and we're just going to gently comb through all those strands. You can see where they've twisted, you get this sort of curly effect as you're untwisting them. Now I'm using the wider part of the comb to start with, but it will take some time. You just got to persevere, and you might need to do some different directions if they're twisted in a different way when you wound them up. So there might be different ways that you need to comb. And when you've done one section, just need to move it around and just keep combing through. Don't worry if you get these bits of fluffy fairies coming off. Just keep going. So as you're working your way around now, you might want to pull the seed pod down a bit just to make sure that you really get into the bottom of those stitches, because you don't really want to be able to see any of the threads joined together. You want them all to be separated. So find a way that works for you. As I say, going in different directions can help. Just be careful not to catch the seed pod itself, and you might need to separate out as well so you can get to the ones in the middle. And try this out with different sizes. I tried it with the smaller end and didn't find it as successful to start with, but you work out which one works best for you. So pause the video now whilst you fluff up your seeds, and I will see you in a moment for the last part. So I finished fluffing up my seeds here, and I'm going to just give mine a quick trim, just because I don't really want all the fluffiness on the end, because that keeps coming off. But if you like the look where it's got the fluffy thinner bits on the end, then by all means keep them. It's all about your design and what you prefer, and also what use it's going to be made of. So if you're making it for a brooch, you might not want the fluffy bits coming off, but if you're making this to go on a wreath that's going to be just displayed, then you might be quite happy to have the fluffy bits there. So that's the first part finished. We just need to do the stem, so I'm just going to move all these lovely fluffy bits out of the way. So the final part to make is the stem, and we're going to do that by taking our green again. Going to make a slip knot. You can do this in whichever way you prefer, and we're going to chain 12. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Then working back up the chain, we're going to do second chain from the hook. We're going to do a slip stitch, and in the next one a slip stitch, and in the next one a slip stitch. So that's 3 slip stitches. We're then going to do the picot stitch in the same way that we did on top of the seed pod here. So we're going to chain 2, 1, 2, slip stitch in the second chain from the hook, that's 1, and then slip stitch in the next stitch, 1, and the next one, 2, and the next one, 3, and the next one, 4, and then a picot, 1, 2. And it doesn't really matter what the gap is between your picot stitches. You could have more if you want. If you want to make a thicker stem, you could work down this side of the chain and put more picot stitches in. It's entirely up to you how you'd like to do it. Slip stitch into the next stitch, and we're going to slip stitch in each stitch to the end now. So I'm just going to have 2 picots as my little leaves. Going to fasten off so you aren't over pull through. I'm going to leave a little bit of a tail because I want to weave this into the bottom of my seed pod. I'm just going to tighten up those knots. So that's our stem, and then I'm going to take my tail and they're going to go across the bottom of the seed pod, so in round 1 over that section there, through the middle there, and out the other side. Just bring that a little bit closer, and I'm going to pull that long tail through, and then you can see if you pull the shorter tail it goes over that middle section and covers it up. So taking that little tail, and I'm going to make a knot, and then do another one. You can do a couple of these knots depending how secure you feel you need it to be. So I've done 3 knots there. I'm now going to take my yarn needle, put it through, and we're going to just hide these ends away. So I pulled it through, going to squash that there. Oops. That's one, and then take my yarn needle and go through another area. Just take the smaller tail. Oops. Try that again. So I'm going in near to where the stitch is. I can go through the middle there, put my yarn through and just pull it through the pod. Squash the pod down a little bit. And there we have it. Now you should be able to feel your seeds inside, and it's a little bit squashy around the outside. If you wanted it to be a bit firmer, you could put some poly toy stuffing in there, and that would just give it a bit more rigidity. But actually I quite like it, and if you do enough of your seeds then it should sort of fill it out quite nicely. So we have our seeds in our seed pod and our lovely stem, and that's how to make a thistle. I really hope you found today's tutorial useful. If there are any information that you need to find out about this video, have a look in the descriptions below where I post all the links to any freebies and other videos I think you might find useful. Don't forget, if you have enjoyed this video, to give me a thumbs up below. Don't forget also to subscribe and hit the notification bell if you've enjoyed it and you'd like to see more of my tutorial videos. There are 2 other videos on screen to help you on your crochet journey, and I will see you over there. Thank you so much for joining me on this one, and happy hooking!